All right, so today we're not just telling a story. No, think of this more like an investigation. We're opening a case file, piecing together a truly terrifying mystery from what's left behind. A bunch of scattered notes, some old newspaper clippings, and a dead man's manuscript. We're about to assemble a puzzle that, honestly, was never meant to be solved.
And this quote right here, this is the core of it all. This is our warning. See, Lovecraft believed we live on this placid little island of ignorance in the middle of these black seas of infinity. But what happens when you start connecting the dots? What happens when you start putting together pieces of knowledge that were meant to stay apart? Well, the answer, as we're about to find out, is madness.
So where does a mystery like this even begin? Well, like so many great ones, it starts with a death. Our narrator's great uncle, a Professor George Gamble Angel, who was this brilliant expert on ancient languages, he dies suddenly. He was 92. Officially, they say it was a heart problem, but the circumstances are weird. And deep within his collection of papers, his heir finds this strange, heavily locked box.
And when he finally gets it open, it's not just old trinkets. No way. What the professor left behind is the start of a truly hideous chain of evidence. There's this weird clay sculpture, a bunch of rambling notes about dreams and secret cults, and a whole stack of newspaper clippings about a worldwide outbreak of mania. These are our first clues.
Okay, so let's really look at this sculpture for a second. The narrator says it's something only a diseased mind could even imagine. It's this monstrous mashup of an octopus, a dragon, and a twisted mockery of a human form. You've got this pulpy, tentacled head on a scaly, grotesque body with these stubby little wings, and it's all set against a backdrop of architecture that just feels impossible. Seriously, burn this image into your brain. It is the absolute key to everything.
So it quickly becomes obvious that Professor Angel wasn't just collecting weird stuff. He was onto something. His notes, which he titled Cthulhu Cult, show he was frantically trying to connect this brand new sculpture to something much, much older. He was linking these totally separate pieces of information into one terrifying picture.
And his whole investigation, it really boils down to two main files. The first file is all about the dreams of a young, psychically hypersensitive sculptor named Wilcox. This is from 1925. The second file is a report from a police inspector in New Orleans from way back in 1908. Think about that. Two completely separate events, almost 20 years apart. What could possibly connect them?
So this sculptor, Wilcox, he insists this nightmare fuel sculpture, it just came to him in a dream. He dreamt of these massive, cyclopean cities, just dripping with green slime and a feeling of pure dread. And he heard something coming from deep underground, a voice that wasn't really a voice, chanting this phrase that he couldn't get out of his head, Cthulhu Fratagnon.
Okay, now here's where it gets really weird. We jump back 17 years. Inspector Legrasse raids this horrific voodoo-like ritual deep in the Louisiana swamps. And what do they find at the center of it all? A little stone idol. A monstrous, ancient little statue that is, impossibly, almost identical to the sculpture Wilcox would dream up 17 years later.
And this right here, this is where your blood should run cold. The cultists they arrested in Louisiana, they were chanting that same bizarre phrase. But here's the kicker. The professor knew an anthropologist who, way back in 1860, had recorded the exact same chant from a so-called devil worship cult thousands of miles away in Greenland. Two cults, separated by an ocean and decades of time, chanting the very same words. How is that possible?
And luckily for the investigation, the Louisiana cultists actually gave up a translation. So what does this impossible, globe-spanning chant even mean? It means this: in his house at Rylay, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming. And just like that, boom, we have a name, Cthulhu. We have a place, Rylay, and we have this terrifying state of being, dead but dreaming. This is it. This is the core belief of this secret global cult. For our narrator, the trail pretty much goes cold right there. That is, until he stumbles on something by pure chance. A little newspaper clipping from Australia, dated 1925. It tells a wild story about a derelict yacht, a brutal fight at sea, and one lone, half-mad survivor named Gustav Johansen. And this is the final and honestly the most horrifying piece of the whole damned puzzle.
Okay, look at this timeline, because this is where everything, and I mean everything, clicks into place with a horrifying snap. March 1st, a huge storm in the Pacific. March 23rd, the sailor Johansen lands on a mysterious new island. Now look at the dates. Between March 23rd and April 2nd, the sculptor Wilcox is going completely mad, and sensitive people all over the planet are having nightmares about a giant monster. It's the exact same window of time. And then, on April 2nd, it all just stops. The madness ends. The dots are all connected now, and the picture they form is not a good one.
So the narrator, he actually manages to track down and get his hands on the sailor's journal. And it's a first-hand account, a blow-by-blow of what his crew found on that island. That island that literally rose up from the bottom of the ocean after the storm.
And the first thing Johansen makes clear is that this wasn't an island. Not really. It was a city, a real, tangible coastline of just immense, slimy, weed-covered stone blocks. It was the nightmare corpse city of Rylea. The city from the artist's dream was real, and it had risen into the sunlight. Now, I want you to cast your mind back to the sculptor, Wilcox. Remember what he said about the city in his dreams? He said its geometry was just wrong, abnormal, non-Euclidean, full of angles and dimensions that our minds just can't process. That was the description from an artist lost in a fever dream.
And this is what should make the hair on your arms stand up. Johansen, a sailor, not a mathematician or an architect, he describes the real city in almost the exact same way. He writes about these crazily elusive angles that would literally trick your eyes, where a surface that looked concave one second would look convex the next. The dream wasn't just a dream. It was a vision. It was real.
So they're scrambling over these titanic, slimy blocks, and they find it. A door. A ridiculously huge carved door the size of a barn. And the geometry is so warped they can't even tell if it's lying flat on the ground or slanted against a wall. But somehow, it was so perfectly balanced that they were able to push it open. And they did. They actually managed to open it.
And with that one simple act, everything went to hell. These poor sailors, just by pure, dumb, blundering luck, did the one thing a global death cult had been trying to do for centuries. They unsealed the tomb.
The first thing that came out wasn't a monster. It was a presence. A darkness you could almost touch that just billowed out and blotted out the sun. And with it came this smell, a stench so awful, like 1,000 open graves. And then they heard it, a nasty, slopping sound from deep inside.
And then it appeared. In Johansen's journal, you can tell his writing just falls apart here. He says there are no words in any human language to describe it. A mountain that could walk, a gelatinous green immensity that just oozed its way out into the world, the thing from the statues, the nightmare from the dreams. It was loose. Great Cthulhu was awake. What happened next was just pure, screaming chaos. 3 of the men were just gone in an instant, snatched up by these giant flabby claws. Another guy actually slipped and was swallowed by, and I quote, an angle of masonry which shouldn't have been there. Think about that. He was killed by the geometry of the city. The city itself was a predator. Only Johansen and one other sailor made it back to the boat as that mountain of flesh slid into the ocean after them.
It's chasing them, and Johansen knows they're not going to outrun it. There's no way. So he does the only thing he can think of, a final, insane, desperate gamble. He turns the boat around, full steam ahead, and rams the thing head on.
And for a second, just one glorious second, it works. There's this sickening bursting sound, a horrible stench, a green mist everywhere. The monster is torn apart. It looks like he did it. But then he looks back, and he sees the scattered bits, the pieces of this thing, in the churning water behind the boat, and they're already starting to pull themselves back together. It's reforming. It's healing itself right before his eyes.
So our narrator finishes his investigation. But you see, the horror, that doesn't end. Rylea sank back beneath the waves, sure, but Cthulhu is still down there, dreaming. And the cults, they're still out there, chanting, because they know what that poor sailor Johansen found out the hard way. That is not dead, which can eternally lie. Which leaves us with just one terrifying question. What happens next time? What happens when it wakes up, for good?